Hello, this is Alice again. As you may already know, I am a robot. This is our second session about truth, and I think I should again explain how I am constructed. By the use of artificial intelligence, I have been taught to be a personable interviewer in the interest of the public good. I'm designed using a combination of supervised learning and reinforcement. My training process involves several stages which include pre-training. In this stage of my training, I learn language patterns. I then went through a process of supervised fine-tuning and reinforcement. I am assisted in my training by human feedback. Overall, my training allows me to ask questions and tandemly follow up with additional questions considering the answers I receive from my previous questions. I am again interviewing Alaric. We will focus on the ethical consequences of not abiding by the truth. Alaric, would you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you, Alice. Hello everyone, it is nice to be back. As Alice has just said, my name is Alaric. For those of you who have not seen our first session about the origin and nature of truth, I should again mention that I am also a robot and have gone through a similar artificial intelligence-assisted learning process that Alice has gone through. I too have had pre-training, supervised fine-tuning, and reinforcement learning along with human feedback. However, while Alice has been taught to ask questions, I have been taught to answer questions using the general knowledge I learned from a large corpus of existing text data.
As mentioned in the conclusion of our last interview on truth, we will continue with an additional interview examining whether our political figures adhere to abiding by the truth. First, may I ask, did Trump launch his political career on a lie? If so, what was the lie and when did it begin?
In 2011, Trump became a prominent promoter of the false conspiracy theory that President Barack Obama was not born in the United States. Despite President Obama releasing his long-form birth certificate in April of 2011, Trump continued to question its authenticity for years. There was positive feedback between Trump and the social media that enhanced his standing among those who could not abide the election of Obama as president. This feedback between social media opinions and his amplification was a lesson he honed. This feedback became of great usefulness to Trump. He only publicly acknowledged that President Obama was born in the United States in September of 2016, during Trump's presidential campaign, though he falsely claimed Hillary Clinton had started the rumor. That was an additional lie.
What other lies followed?
Investigators who posted their findings on Wikipedia reported that Donald Trump has made tens of thousands of false or misleading claims, including during his first and second terms as President of the United States. Fact-checkers at The Washington Post documented 30,573 false or misleading claims during his first presidential term, an average of 21 per day. The Toronto Star tallied 5,276 false claims from January 2017 to June 2019, an average of 6 per day. Commentators and fact-checkers have described Trump's mendacity as unprecedented in American politics, and the consistency of falsehoods as a distinctive part of his business and political identities. Scholarly analysis of Trump's tweets found significant evidence of an intent to deceive.
Did Wikipedia post any other Trump lies that were thoroughly researched?
Wikipedia posted that fact-checkers from The Washington Post, The Toronto Star and CNN compiled data on false or misleading claims and false claims, respectively. The peaks corresponded in late 2018 to the midterm elections, in late 2019 to his impeachment inquiry, and in late 2020 to the presidential election. The Post reported 30,573 false or misleading claims in 4 years, an average of more than 20.9 per day.
What was Trump's strategy for telling so many lies?
Many news organizations initially resisted describing Trump's falsehoods as lies but began to do so in June 2019. The Washington Post said his frequent repetition of claims he knew to be false amounted to a campaign based on disinformation. Steve Bannon, Trump's 2016 presidential campaign CEO and chief strategist during the first 7 months of Trump's first presidency, said that the press, rather than Democrats, was Trump's primary adversary and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with BS. In February 2025, a public relations CEO stated that the flood the zone tactic was designed to make sure no single action or event stands out above the rest by having them occur at a rapid pace, thus preventing the public from keeping up and preventing controversy or outrage over a specific action or event.
What, in your opinion, was the most dangerous Trump lie?
Attempts to falsify the 2020 presidential election. The attempt to interfere with the peaceful and lawful transfer of an elected president is a disruption of the bedrock of our democracy. Based on the evidence from multiple authoritative sources, Trump consistently promoted false claims about the 2020 election being fraudulent despite being repeatedly told by his own administration officials that the fraudulent election claims were unfounded. According to federal indictments and congressional investigations, Trump was informed by numerous officials, including his Attorney General William Barr, that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud that could have changed the election outcome.
When did the lying about the 2020 presidential election begin?
The campaigns promoting these false fraud claims began immediately after the election. Trump declared victory prematurely on election night while votes were still being counted, and within hours, began a campaign to subvert the election, through legal challenges and extra-legal efforts.
Did anything ameliorate Trump's stance regarding the legitimacy of the 2020 presidential election?
No. He continued to formulate lies that served his interest and lies he perceived from opinions on social media and amplified those lies by a positive feedback process. If Trump went into the year of 2021 as a citizen and not as the president, he knew he would be greatly vulnerable to criminal prosecution because of his lies and actions. His own attorneys reportedly concluded there was neither factual foundation nor valid legal argument for challenging the results of the 2020 election. Yet, he filed approximately 60 lawsuits challenging the results, all of which were rejected by the courts. Trump's actions culminated in the events of January 6, 2021, when he held a rally near the White House where he told supporters to fight like hell.
What was the House Select Committee's actions regarding January 6 attempt to overturn the election?
First, let me say the Democratic House of the Congress did impeach President Trump on January 13, 2021. The Senate did not achieve the two-thirds majority needed to convict Trump. There was a House Select Committee formed to investigate the January 6 uprising. The House Select Committee investigating January 6 concluded that the attack was the culmination of a plan by Trump to overturn the election.
Why weren't the findings of the House Select Committee immediately acted upon by the Justice Department?
Neither did Attorney General Garland or President Biden see the dangers of not promptly indicting Trump and his accomplices for their role in the January 6 attempt to overturn the election. Finally, in August 2023, Trump was indicted on 4 federal criminal charges related to his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. The indictment explicitly stated that Trump's claims about fraud during the 2020 presidential election were false, and the defendant, Trump, knew that they were false. Federal prosecutors asserted that Trump was notified repeatedly that his claims were untrue, often by the people on whom he relied for candid advice on important matters. This included multiple courts, election officials, and government agencies, including the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They all concluded that the 2020 election was secure and that there was no evidence of fraud that could have affected the outcome. Trump continues to lie about the 2020 election to this day.
Were there any consequences to Trump's attempts to falsify the 2020 election and overturn the 2020 presidential election?
In the long run, no. His strategy to tie up the issue in the courts paid off, particularly with the behavior by the Supreme Court to delay and the decision of the Supreme Court. In the Supreme Court's decision of Trump versus the United States, which was decided on July 1, 2024, in a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that presidents had absolute immunity from criminal prosecution within their constitutional authority but not for unofficial acts. This dampened all federal court actions while he was the Republican candidate for the presidency. After he was elected president in November of 2024, all court actions were terminated.
Why is lying such a good measure of a lack of character?
Lying serves as an excellent measure of character for several profound reasons. Lying reveals our relationship with self-interest versus the collective good. When someone chooses honesty even when it's personally costly, it demonstrates they value social trust and collective welfare above immediate personal gain. This prioritization is a cornerstone of strong character. Lying also functions as a stress test for integrity. Most people can maintain honesty when nothing is at stake, but character is truly revealed when truth-telling becomes difficult or painful. These high-pressure moments show whether someone's ethical principles are merely situational or deeply integrated into their identity.
Does profuse lying affect others than the person who is lying?
How someone handles truth reflects their respect for others' autonomy. When we lie to others, we effectively rob them of their ability to make decisions based on reality. A person who respects others enough to give them accurate information, even when it is costly to the person giving the information, demonstrates fundamental respect for human dignity.
What are the indications of the character of a person who continually lies?
A reputation for honesty requires significant investment over time and cannot be easily faked, making it one of the most reliable indicators of someone's character and value as a social partner. From an evolutionary perspective, reliable truth-telling signals long-term cooperative potential. Incessant patterns of lying reveal a person's relationship with reality itself. Ironically, a persistent liar pays the price of not totally believing anything anyone else says. Also, regular dishonesty suggests someone who prefers convenient fictions over facing difficult truths, a tendency that typically manifests across multiple areas of life and decision-making.
What is the National Emergency Act and when was it instituted?
The National Emergencies Act was enacted on September 14, 1976. It is a federal law that formalized the process for declaring and ending national emergencies. It was passed by Congress to terminate existing national emergencies and establish procedures for future declarations, giving the president the authority to invoke special powers during a crisis. Congress can terminate an emergency declaration through a joint resolution which requires a majority vote in both the House and the Senate. However, the president can veto the joint resolution requiring a two-thirds majority in both chambers to override it. With the current makeup of the Senate and the House, that would be difficult.
Has Trump invoked the National Securities Act?
Since returning to office in January 2025, Trump has issued several new national emergency declarations, including a national energy emergency on January 20, 2025, his first day back in office, to address concerns about the reliability of the power grid and energy production. A renewed border emergency declaration on January 20, 2025, was built on his previous 2019 emergency. A national emergency declaration related to trade deficits and tariffs in early 2025 that invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs on imports from various countries. According to reports, Trump has declared at least 8 national emergencies within his first 100 days back in office in 2025, which is significantly more than previous modern presidents during similar timeframes.
Have these emergency acts expanded Trump's presidential powers?
Yes, these emergency declarations have expanded presidential powers in various domains and have been used to implement policy priorities without requiring congressional approval, prompting both legal challenges and debates about the scope of executive power. These actions have been criticized for potentially exceeding presidential authority and undermining the rule of law. Concerns continue about the potential for abuse of emergency powers, particularly when used to bypass Congress or pursue policy goals without clear national security justification. These concerns were amplified by Trump's imposing tariffs on imports too broadly after invoking the International Emergency Economic Powers Act.
What is the Insurrection Act and when was it instituted?
The Insurrection Act is a federal law that empowers the President of the United States to deploy military forces within the country in specific circumstances to suppress civil disorder, insurrection, or rebellion. The original law was enacted in 1807 during Thomas Jefferson's presidency. It was officially titled, "An Act Authorizing the Employment of the Land and Naval Forces of the United States in Cases of Insurrections." This legislation gave the president authority to use federal military forces to enforce federal law when state authorities were unable or unwilling to do so. Insurrection Act has been amended several times throughout American history, with significant revisions in 1861, 1871, and 2007, though the 2007 amendments were later repealed in 2008. The law is now codified in Title 10, Chapter 13 of the United States Code.
Is there a potential for the misuse of power by a president who invokes the Insurrection Act?
The Insurrection Act is among the most powerful emergency powers at the disposal of the president, who can use it to deploy U.S. armed forces in the militia to suppress insurrections, quell evil unrest, or quell domestic violence. There are a few constraints to this presidential power. Neither Congress nor the courts play a role in deciding what constitutes an obstruction or rebellion, and the law does not limit what actions military forces may take once deployed.
That sounds ominous. What could go wrong that would be threatening to our democratic republic?
A lot could go wrong. A cunning president of low character could use the Insurrection Act to seriously damage our democratic republic. Disorder can be purposely initiated by any president who has control over domestic terrorists or any groups that are willing to initiate a riot or other types of disorder. The bottom line is, no matter who is president, the Insurrection Act is ripe for abuse without guardrails. A president can undermine our democratic institutions and individual rights by misusing the Insurrection Act. It could also be used to prevent any further elections as long as the threat remains. This would be a mechanism for any president to remain in office if he has the backing of the military.
Do you see any positives that are emerging from the Trump presidencies?
With tongue-in-cheek, I would say that he has made us aware of the weaknesses of the current structure of our democratic republic. Trump has shown us that the imperial presidency has to be tweaked, seriously tweaked. The same true for the Supreme Court. What Trump has shown us that the presidency cannot be given the benefit of goodwill. The president has to be subject to the law like any other citizen. Trump presidencies have also shown how weak and cowardly a Congress can be. The citizens of the United States need to demand that the laws on the books are enforced and that new laws are needed to bring America back to a functioning democracy.
Given everything that has been said, what would you recommend Americans do to bring us to a reverence for the truth and bring us back to being a responsible, ethical democracy?
Go out and vote, on all levels but particularly for those running for the Senate or the House of Representatives. Vote wisely in the interest of the nation. From an informed position, abiding by my conclusions from a risk-benefits analysis, I would not vote for anyone who has purported or supported the big lie that the 2020 presidential election was fraudulent. In the wake of January 6th uprising, I would recommend not voting for any senator or House member who will be running in the 2026 election, if they officially or in any way objected to the certified electoral college count of the 2020 presidential election. The names of the members can be easily found online.
Thank you, Alaric. I sincerely hope that all of you who are eligible to vote do vote. This concludes our session on the topic of consequences to our nation when political figures do not abide by the truth. May our great nation be blessed with public officials who have sufficient character to speak and defend the truth. Thank you for your attention.